Okay, welcome to the second session of the 11th International Workshop on ADR, which is being conducted on the 11th and 12th of December. About MediateGuru. MediateGuru is a social initiative led by members across the globe. The aim of the organization is to bridge the gap between the general public and litigation. MediateGuru is creating a social awareness campaign for showcasing mediation as the future, having successfully conducted various international webinars promoting alternative dispute resolution, having a reach in more than 100 countries around the world, with an international family growing each day. It thrives to provide the best lecture series through the best speakers around the globe so that you have a value addition today. I feel very honored today to welcome our esteemed speaker for the second session of the international workshop, Miss Gabriela Assmar. Let me introduce you, Gabriela. Gabriela Assmar is a lawyer, mediator, and conflict resolution professional through mixed systemic methodologies. She started her mediation career over 20 years ago in New York after a master course at NYU. Working in New York law firm, she had a chance to shadow GEM's mediations and mediated at a multi-door courthouse. In 2011, she became a fellow at the Weinstein International Foundation. Back to Brazil in 2000, she was a pioneer mediator, trainer, and co-author of the Brazilian mediation law. Since then, she has worked as a mediator in corporate, family, criminal, and communities conflicts with the Rio de Janeiro court system and in private practice. She supervised court-annexed mediations in Rio de Janeiro since 2007, the first mediation in Rio Court. In the corporate scenario, she served as general counsel, public affairs director, and ombudsman in different sectors. She's a mediator of the global panel serving the UN Ombuds Office, and currently is ombudsman for Petros, the pension fund of Petrobras Brazilian Mineral Company Group. Thank you so much for joining, madam. Without any further delay, let us begin. I would request the speaker to take this session forward and enlighten us all. You can all ask your questions in the chat box. Thank you. The floor is yours.
But it's a pleasure, and we are actually, thanks to the pandemic, living in a much smaller world that connects us much more. So I believe what I bring here today can be interesting because besides everything you said in my bio, I am Brazilian. I live in Brazil. And Brazil, as any other place, has a lot of issues right now. It's going through a very challenging time. But there are some good news. I don't know if you heard of a methodology called constellations, systemic constellations. This methodology, and I know I'm here to talk about mediation, but this methodology, Constellation, was developed by a German man called Bert Hellinger. And Bert Hellinger has passed away in 2019. And there are some other, also German people who have developed different methodologies, but within the same scope, within the same logic as he did. And for some reason, these methodologies have developed more in Brazil, even more than in Germany. Brazil is like a melting pot, a country that was colonized by Portuguese, but that received with open arms a lot of nationalities, a lot of nations throughout history. And I am a fruit of these mixed nations that come together in Brazil. And Brazil is the first country in the globe to adopt constellations, which was originally, and I have to emphasize that, originally conceived as a therapy. But I'm not a therapist, and I can use constellation in my work as a mediator in a very effective way. So Brazil has not only introduced constellations in the court system, thanks to mediation, and I will explain that further, but we have also introduced Constellation in the public health system. Because, and that is just to show, I'm not going to talk about the public health system, but this is just to show that this methodology can be used as a tool for almost anything we can think of. While there is a decision-making process of any kind, this decision-making process can be deepened and broadened through the use of Constellation, because it is a methodology to help us introduce our other intelligences. And this is something that science is already talking about. And actually, Constellation has already a scientific explanation. But what it does, and I'm not going to go through the scientific issues here because our time is very short and I have to link it to mediation. But the very brief explanation of what it does is it helps people individually. So while in mediation, we're normally dealing with both parties at the same time, which makes it very hard because it's not just fixing one airplane in flight, but fixing the whole group of airplanes that cannot crash during the movements we need to make in order to fix it. So whoever has some experience as a mediator knows that anything we can learn in theory, sometimes it sounds very easy in theory, but when you go to practice and you're dealing with people who are in their worst moments in life, or at least in the worst moment of the life of that relationship, because the relationship itself has a flow, has a life of itself that, of course, is dependent on the parties, but many times adds both value and challenges to those individuals. So it's like, I like to give examples, very practical examples. So it's like if a person has her own issues that, of course, are responsible for anything she has lived throughout her life, any choices she has made that have led to the next situation, and then she made new choices, and then next situation, and so on, and that's how we go through life. But you have someone else with different choices, with different perspectives, with different wishes, with different inner issues in culture and etc. So not only they need to find a common place where they can both coexist, and this is the purpose of mediation, but they need to do it at a point when they are seeing completely different things in life. So if we ask the yellow person what she sees, she will describe anything that is happening on my left. And if we ask the green person what he or she sees, he or she will describe what he's seeing on my right side. We don't really, many times we don't give enough attention to the points of view from which they are supposed to decide for something that needs to be acceptable to both. So what we normally do in a mediation setting is that we conceive them as being rational people. Rational in, of course, in mediation, we add the feelings. And this is how I felt in love with mediation. My first experience with mediation was in New York, as you said, and I was studying to be an arbitrator in cases that had to do with corporations in different locations, in different countries, different legal systems. So since I was already a lawyer in a positive law country, I wanted to learn about the common law system so that I could help my clients in arbitrations normally bound to the New York law. That's why I went to New York to learn about the common law system in general. And while I was studying the common law system, I read one sentence about mediation. And this sentence was, it is a methodology that helps parties feel that they can coexist with a common ground solution. So finding solutions that all people involved can accept. And when I read that sentence, it changed my life. Because as a lawyer and as someone who wanted to work with arbitration, at that moment, the arbitration law was only 2 years old in Brazil. And it took a while to become effective because there was a lot of questioning about the constitutionality of arbitration, not exactly arbitration, but about the fact that you had to give up your day in court. So it was an option that took you away from the normal basic rights that you have to go to court and so on. So I was anticipating myself when I went to these studies because I was sure that arbitration was much better than going to court. And then I heard about something that was even better, where we could actually work with the methodology to find solutions that people could be in peace from inside out. And that's what I loved about mediation, because it's like it broadened the decision-making equation of the parties. It brought into account their feelings, their perceptions, their intangible rights, their intangible human rights to be unique. We all have this unavoidable human right to be unique. We are unique. Either we like it or not, either we want it or not, we are different. And that's what brings us together. So I never believed in a methodology where everybody had to be the same and think the same and look the same and argue the same in order to have whatever was the result of that experience. And that's what happens when we go to court, because the judge, no matter how great the judge is, he is trained to read the law in a consistent way all through the different cases that he faces. He needs to be consistent because this is a basic principle. It's like treating everybody the same, but we are not the same. So we can never have a system where everybody will feel accepted, will feel included, if not through the people's own ability to build unique solutions. So that's why mediation made so much sense to me, and I devoted my life to mediation because I really believe that that was the new frontier. And as Weinstein had many wonderful sentences, and one of them said that humanity will need to find a completely different way of thinking if it is to survive. So finding this way of thinking where we can find unique solutions for unique problems of unique people is something that is about survival, about humankind's survival and betterment. So that's why I was completely in love with mediation, and I did mediation as my life's mission for a long time. And then during a mediation session, I had been a client to Constellation, and I'll explain more about Constellation. And I was in this kind of situation that most mediators have at least faced once, where people come from very distant points of view, and they go little step by little step, sometimes big steps, through all the challenges of the conversation. And then when they are one step from holding hands, but they're not there yet, something happens and they just back off and a little more. And then it completely freezes the relationship. And as a mediator, you have no idea what was the thing that you couldn't see. What happened? Why were they crossing all the map towards the intersection? And for some reason, something blocked them. And it's not rational. Because rationally, they have understood that an agreement is much better than a non-agreement, than the opposite, which is to remain in the conflict and have to go to court. That will make them even more apart. And reflecting upon it for a few weeks, I remembered my experience as a client to Constellation. And I said, that can be a mediation tool. So I went back to school and learned how to be a consolator. It is a long training, but it's super worthwhile. As I always tell my first Constellation teacher, I tell him, I came here to search for a matchbox, and you gave me 10 containers, because that's what it brings. I went there for a professional tool, and I gained a lot of self-awareness, because when we need, and actually that helps a lot in mediation trainings too. When we're learning how to help other people, we first learn how to help ourselves, because we are human beings with all our issues, with all our challenges and our fears and everything. And once we are there to help, to serve, we need to be there for them. So at least for the time of the meeting, our issues need to stay outside. Of course, we are still human. Of course, we still make mistakes and we have feelings and etc. But we need to be in the serving mode, which means to be there for them, not for us. So we need at least some self-awareness so that we can make this divide. It's not that we will not be humans, but we will be better humans for a while. We will know how we need to have a different attention quality. It's about quality. It's not intellectual only. It's about behavior. And so, what constellations brought for me? The first constellation experience I ever had was about the fear to speak in public. So it's a good example to give, first because it's real, and second because since that's what I'm doing now, you can see that it works. And it's great to have someone to look at, but many times in this pandemic world, we don't even have a smiling face to look at us, but we are taking the opportunity to talk to so many people that, of course, would take much more to be in the same room, in the same location. So it's always great, and we have to take the opportunity. But so at that moment, that's when I started teaching mediation, and teaching was such a heavy load for me because I had to speak in public. But on the other hand, I knew, since mediation was starting in Brazil, I knew that if I didn't teach, I wouldn't be doing my mission. So I needed to help as many people as possible at least know what mediation was about and want to learn more. So I had to speak in public. And that's why I went to this alternative thing that I had never heard about, but a friend of mine recommended. And if I would spend 30 years talking about my fear to speak in public, I would probably spend 30 years talking about my father, because my father was a great speaker. He was brilliant, but he was a litigation lawyer, very good, by the way, but very litigant. And I never wanted to litigate. I always wanted, even before I learned that mediation existed, I was always searching for a peaceful way of doing things, of doing business, of helping companies and the people inside of them. So I thought I connected the feature of talking in public to litigation. And that was only an intellectual idea, because when I did my first Constellation, my father he just didn't appear. It was all about something that happened in my mother's family, nothing to do with my father. And what Constellation does, and it's not magical, and I'll explain how it works, is to bring up other intelligences, the emotional intelligence, the spiritual intelligence, and that has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with this connection that we all feel, but we will never understand intellectually because it's not tangible. And until not very long ago, science only explained in a rational way what it could see and touch and count. And the spiritual intelligence that is now being studied in many fields, different fields throughout the world, is about an intangible, invisible, but perceivable connection that brings us together, and that brings everybody that belongs in a group together in a certain mode. So the Constellation does that. It helps us understand what really triggers some behaviors in us in a completely not intellectual way, completely not conscient way, but real, very real. So once it becomes from unconscious, it becomes conscient, you can then deal with it in a chosen way. So what I learned in that moment, in that situation about my mother's family, was that there were some loyalties within the system that were theirs, not mine. So for example, in my mother's family, I was, actually my father's too, in my whole family, I was the first woman to ever work out of home. I was the first woman to go to university and to have my professional career taken very seriously. So that is such a stretch. And many times, unconsciously, we go in a direction, but it's like, do I have this right? Do I have the right to be something that none of my ancestors were, because they couldn't, not because they didn't want to? Why do I have so much more than they had? And what do I do with it in order to still belong? So this was completely unconscious, because my mother was the first person to give me, she was my cheerleader. She was the one to put me to the world and say, you go. I'm happy that you go. I'm happy that you can do what I couldn't. So I get touched, of course, when I remember all of that. I'm so thankful. And that is the beauty of it. Once you realize everything that has happened before you, so that you could be here today doing exactly what you're doing with the opportunities that you have, there are more than they got, but they also got more than their ancestors and so on. Because that's how humanity goes on. That's how we develop, and that's what we're here for. So once we understand the dynamic, we can only be thankful, even to the bad moments, to the hard feelings, and everything that constitutes what we are today. So it's kind of it's a freedom feeling. We become free to be the best of ourselves. And this is just one example. There are so many others. I don't want to sound like it's always easy. Many times there are many layers, and we have to do it many times in order to feel some movement. But I mean, one day we will talk more about it. What matters here is that once I learn how to use Constellation to empower mediation, what happens is that many times I don't even give this name. I don't even name what I'm doing, but I have a much wider toolbox to help parties going through the hardest moments of mediation, when they are about to face what was really traumatic in their relationship, talking about them, or in their individual lives that brought them to a behavior that this one couldn't understand. So what makes this person behave the way she did, that this one can never understand, because she never went through something like she did. And the opposite also happens, because no one on earth that I know is free from traumas, from hard moments, from hard feelings, from things to be overcome and loved. At the end, we are all here to learn how to love, especially those that sound so different than us, that we think, no, he cannot be serious. Because if I am serious and what he's saying is completely the opposite of what I see, he cannot be serious. So before I want to listen to Frederica and to all of you, but I just wanted to say that throughout Brazil is a very, very big country, not as big as India. Brazil is about 17 times smaller than India in terms of population. But one day I was in the United States and with a group of mediators from all over the world. And before me, we were all supposed to talk about the stage of mediation in our countries. And before me, there was this Indian friend of mine who has been working with mediation for a long time in Bangalore. And she said, at that moment, it was 2015, and this is a number that I clearly remember, but maybe you have a different data, I don't know. But she said, India really needs mediation because it has, at that time, 32 million pending cases in court. And I didn't know if I should laugh or cry, because Brazil is so much smaller in terms of population. It has now about 200 million people now. And at that moment, Brazil had 108 million pending cases for 200 million people. So it's like everybody is in court. And when they introduced mediation in the court system, which was in 2016, very late in comparison to other countries, mediation brought to the court system. We had a mediation law, a specific mediation law, and the revision of the Civil Procedure Code coming into force at the same time in 2016. And once that happened, we created throughout the whole courts in Brazil. So all the state courts, we have 26 states in Brazil, they had to create an alternative dispute resolution center within the court system. And each state did in a way, but there was some standardized guidance, but not it was not completely they didn't have to be the same, but they had to have some common features. And it was in one of those centers that one judge that learned about Constellation decided to introduce Constellation as one dispute resolution alternative methodology. And that spread out, and now the last information I have is that we now have 19 of the 26 states practicing Constellation within the court system in some way. They're not the same. They're very different modes of doing it. But to give you some tangible notion of what it does, and I'll talk specifically about one example in Rio, the state where I live. What they say is that they did a research sending some family cases directly to mediation and some other cases through Constellation, and then after Constellation to mediation. So they compared the number of agreements and the effectiveness of the agreements. The cases that went directly to mediation, they settle in about 50% of the opportunities. The cases that went through Constellation, they settle about 86% of the cases. And not just the number of agreements count, but the fact that these people that went through Constellation and then to mediation, they normally do not come back to court. So they settle for good. They settle from inside out. Mediation is also very powerful to do that. But the main difference is that in mediation, we are also going through the mental mind. The dialogue needs to be done, even when it is reflective and transforming people in their way to deal with each other and etc. And I really believe that, and I had so many experiences like that only with mediation. But it's still very mental. It's still very similar in terms of decision-making process. And when we go through Constellation, we reach the very cause of what caused the problems normally. So that's why I believe it's more effective. And as I said, it's not a universal number that I'm talking about here. It's one project that I know the numbers by heart, and there are so many others, and so little research to this point. But the one thing that I really believe, and I say here very humbly, is that for anybody, listening about it, about Constellation, is one thing. I hope you think it makes sense, but if you don't, you're in your rights. But going through it is a completely different game. It's something that it's very based on experience. And I encourage everybody to try. Nowadays, before the pandemic, most Constellations were presential, of course, in the same room, everybody. But nowadays it's been done online, and it's absolutely the same. We learned, all the Constellators learned how to work online, and most of the people around the world is doing it this way. So it's absolutely accessible. Please, if there are questions or reflections.
Thank you, Gabriela, first of all. This is something very new for many of us, I think, and it's been very enlightening. I will see first if we have any questions from the chat. Let me see. So I encourage everyone who might have doubts, questions, curiosities to step in. And I have one question myself, if nobody's still ready with theirs. How do you become a constellator for mediation? You mentioned that you went through additional training.
I didn't hear you. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering, how do you become a constellator for mediation? You mentioned that you went through additional training. How is that about? How does that work? Thank you.
Yeah, my first training was 2 years long.
Wow.
Uh, I don't. There are many trainings nowadays online being offered all over the world. The main
Mm-hmm.
countries, as I said, although it's quite spread in Europe too. So in Portugal, there are many constellators. In Spain, um, in Germany for sure, and in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Brazil is the country where it has. It's not just that it developed more, but it is also being. Uh, there are new levels of development going on all the time. So
Mm-hmm.
we have people giving trainings uh, specifically to the use, not exactly in mediation, but it's what they call systemic law. So
Mm-hmm.
this one judge that I mentioned, he went, the first one, he went to Germany, he learned constellations with Bert Hellinger, the creator of the methodology,
Mm-hmm.
and he came back and started applying it to his own court. And he is the one of so many now that give training to of systemic law. Systemic law is basically the use of constellation in legal matters. So it can be used in many
Mm-hmm.
ways. Mediation is one of them as a tool. Uh, so there are a lot of these trainings. I have no idea if there's one in English. I have no idea. I didn't search.
Mm-hmm.
There is probably something in German, but we have to find out, or we have to start one. But the
Yeah.
basic training, I'm sure there is in English. I have a friend in Australia giving an excellent training. I don't know if she does it online, so it's in English
Mm-hmm.
and etc. But the first thing that I would like to recommend when you're searching for such a training is that try to really the professor will probably want to interview each student, but you also need to interview the professor. You need to
Mm-hmm.
understand if the methodology will be introduced from inside out,
Okay.
because there are many trainings as well, like in a weekend you become a constellator. It's just not possible. It doesn't make any sense, because you first need
Okay.
to find the way uh, from inside out, which doesn't happen like that.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Gabriela. I see some questions here. So I'm gonna read it out for you. So Indians are generally a little more apprehensive to opt for ADR over traditional litigation. How do you think people can be mediation in civil cases in India?
I think your voice was cut for a while. Can you repeat?
Sorry, how do you think people can be encouraged towards mediation in India in civil cases?
Not only in India, in the whole world that I know.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe that the choice of the methodology, no matter which methodology, needs to be done outside or before the conflict,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a neurological answer. Neurologically, our brain behaves different when it faces conflict. Conflict is like any danger that your brain is trained to avoid. So once you face conflict, which is the imminence of being excluded of something, you lose the capability of working from the best part of your brain, which is the frontal neurocortex. And you go back to your reptilian brain. The reptilian brain is the most ancestral part of your brain, which is very simple. You can either face or flee, kill or die. It's always either or. And this is not where you can search, where you can decide for anything. Actually, you don't decide. You're not able to do complex rationalities at that moment, especially when you're talking about that is supposed to be collaborative. So coming back to the question, I believe in law that makes you try mediation before being able to go to court. The best countries that I take for examples are Italy and Argentina and some states of the United States. In the law in Brazil, I was one of the co-authors of the Brazilian law. I don't think it's the best, but it was the best possible. We don't have an opt-out system like they do in Italy or Argentina, but we have some triggers that make you go to mediation in some circumstances, and it's already better than nothing. So making people go to mediation is not the opposite of the voluntary principle of mediation, because you can make them go to a first meeting, but you cannot make them stay. There is a sentence that I like to give as an example for that. You can take a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. It's the same thing. You can take people to mediation, but you cannot make them mediate. But having that first opportunity to be in front of the other party, to be present themselves and not just the lawyers, and listen about what mediation can bring as an opportunity is already life-changing. And once you have the excuse to prepare for that, many times you see angles of the agreement, of the conflict, of the situation that you never thought of before. Many times in that opportunity, you listen to the other party in a way that you did never before, even if you have coexisted with the person for so long. So helping people get there is the key. It's not after they are in conflict that they will be able to make that intelligent decision, no matter how great the person is. But it's not, they're not able to. Even us mediators, when we are a party in a conflict, and we have genuinely tried everything we know to solve the conflict and we were not successful, even us will think that mediation will not help, because we are in that neurological mode that doesn't help very much.
Thank you, Gabriela. I love the metaphor of the horse being brought to the river. And in fact, we have another question here in the chat. Here, Jvala asks, do you think there must be necessary, I think he means mandatory mediation in every civil suit?
It depends, because, for example, in the United States, that's where I first learned about mediation. They didn't start having a law, but I don't know in India how it works, but going to court in the United States is very expensive upfront. So once you have a great barrier to go to court, you have to reflect very clearly, and your lawyer is supposed to help you in that reflection, if litigation is an option or not. Because just the information that a company is going to court in a complex case may may make their stock, if they are in the stock market, open stock, they may lose a lot of value because litigation is so expensive. And another thing that we have to bear in mind is that in the United States, when you go to court and you lose, the contingency fees, the money that you pay to the winner lawyer is 100% of the law firm bill. So your risk is huge, and you know it from start. Comparing to Brazil, which is my comparison. In Brazil, it is very expensive to go to court in the long run, because it's not so expensive to enter the court system. The fees you pay to enter are not so much, but it becomes expensive because it takes so long to get out. The medium time, the average time in court in Brazil is about 10 years, if you're lucky. So after 10 years, it's not just the money that you pay the court, but the money that you pay the lawyer, the number of opportunities that you lost, all the control expenses of that situation, and so on. But when you're enraged, when you're feeling the conflict in your body, before you start the path within the judicial system, you're not seeing it. It's not clear for you how much it will take until you get out. And once you realize, and you're about half the way, you have so much sunk cost. Sunk cost is that expense that will not you cannot recover. It's money that has already become garbage. So there's nothing you can do to avoid that pain anymore. So once you come to your feet and realize how much you have spent and the other opportunity, and you compare the cost to the other opportunities that you would have, it's already too late. And you're already there, and you say, well, but I spent so much, so let me go a little more and a little more, and so on. So in a system like the United States, where the cost of going to court is clear up front, it is more likely that people can make a rational decision not to go to court. But in a system like Brazil, where access to justice was considered free justice, so many people go to court without paying anything. Of course, there is a cost that the whole society pays, but this is spread out, so we don't feel it in our unique body and our unique pocket. And in the United States also, there is all this structure built to help people have an opportunity to go to alternative dispute resolution, which also helps. And the last thing that I wanted to mention about it, that in 2011, when I was doing a research project about the elements that build a healthy mediation market, I interviewed many people, including a very prestigious law firm top partner. And I asked him what made him take clients to mediation when it was still a novelty in the United States. He was one of the pioneers taking clients to mediation. And he told me, he said, I didn't take my clients to mediation because I loved mediation or because I wanted them to be able to hold hands at the end or anything. I just did it because I needed to find a solution for my client that was more intelligent than what the other law firm was offering.
That's interesting. And I think in Italy we are on the same page. Just like you said, you mentioned in Brazil, you know when you enter, but you have no idea when you will get out of court. So I totally support the view. So we have another question from Mandarun. Would you say that the constellator's duties are exactly similar to the one to a mediator of the mediator?
No, it's a
No.
great question.
Mhm.
I wanted to compare the neutrality that we learn in mediation to the its peer in Constellation. So when we are mediating, we learn in any mediation course that we need to be neutral. Being neutral means not cheering for any side, not making pressure for one or another choice of resolution, uh, and being there. If not, I mean, I don't really believe in neutrality because I think it's a good idea, but it's not possible to humans at all. We are not neutral because we
Mhm.
have our own preferences, our own points of view, our own history, and so on. But we learn to use what we know to make questions and not to give answers. Basically, that's what neutrality is in practice, right? And uh, we know that the more we want to help with our own experiences and ideas, the less we do help the parties feel that they were the authors of the solution in the end. And if they don't feel it, the solution is not theirs. And it's
Mhm.
only effective when they believe that when they really understand with their whole intelligences that that solution was the best possible. Maybe not the best that they dreamed of, but the best possible in reality, in complex
Mhm.
reality. But the mediators have a goal, which is to find a solution that drives to an agreement that closes the conflict and the legal case if it's in court. So it's clear that we're leading the parties somewhere, and we know where. In Constellation, the comparison to neutrality, the name that we use is we have to have zero intention. We go, we facilitate the process of the client to look at whatever comes up with no intention. If
Mhm.
the client doesn't understand anything, is not touched, is not connected, we cannot do anything.
Mhm.
So what constellation, the deliverable of a constellation is a clear map where you are and where you want to go. What is going on between these two places in in a comparable way, in a symbolic way. So if I'm yellow now, but I want to be green one day, where is the place of green? Where it's its best place? And of course, what happens between here and here? So constellation will bring you a clearer view, but this view is normally completely different than anything you have imagined before, for the very logical reason that if you had it in your conscious mind already, you would have been there already. So, uh, since it deals with the unconsciousness, you cannot rush it. Each client has its own pace. You cannot imagine it before. You cannot start from the presumption that this will be the same as some other client or yourself or anybody that you know that had the same symptom outside. So each case is really completely different. And sometimes it makes no sense to the constellator, but it does to the client. So great, you've done your job. What I do with Constellation many times when I have, and that is also something very interesting to think about when we are mediators. because at least in my experience, the hardest part of mediation is to get to the table. When you have one party that searches for you as a private mediator and trusts you, this is already a great reason for the other party not to trust you because they are in a conflict mode. So bringing the other party to the table is a huge challenge. So many times what I do with this one client that came to me is I ask if he wants to consolate the case and to check on the field, as we say, if there's room for mediation. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. And when there's not, because what Constellation will show is what is inside of the client, not the other party, of course. It wouldn't be ethical to consolate someone that is not there. But if there's no room for this person inside unconsciously, starting a mediation will not be very useful. You can even do it. Many times you have surprises, but it will be harder to bring the other party. And when this person accepts, even if there's no room for mediation, this person will be more prone to find room within himself to accept life as it is and to accept the other party as he or she is. So that is already a few steps along the way to a peaceful solution.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you so much for such a vibrant and interactive and knowledgeable session. And I would like to thank all the participants for asking questions and joining us. It has been a brilliant conversation, and I've learned, I'm sure many of us have learned so many new things today. And I would request everyone to please fill up the feedback form before we leave in order to receive your certificates for yesterday's and today's sessions. And thank you everyone for joining us. There are many opportunities, great opportunities by MediateGuru for you guys. So I will just wrap up what we have. MediateGuru has launched the second edition of the virtual international mediation competition for 2022. And this is a unique opportunity for students to learn and practice mediation and negotiation skills through the role-playing of a mediation problem drafted by experienced mediators and practitioners. So registration also for the mediation school batch number 2 are now open. And this course of the school is carefully crafted in order to strengthen a student's grip on the working of mediation and other ADR methods. And this course will follow special curated topics covered by Dr. Ashudiman and other guest lecturers around the globe. So all details are available on MediateGuru's website. And if you don't want to miss any updates from MediateGuru's follow us on our social media. And also join the WhatsApp group that is sent in the chat box. So thank you again, Gabriela, for such an interesting conversation today. And I hope to see you all soon. Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.